Content warning. This episode of What the Trans contains references to transphobic violence, transphobic murder. We're covering the Brianna Ghey thing, so you can imagine what the rest of the content warnings are. So yeah, now you've been warned content-wise. On with the episode!
The category is What the Trans Darlings.
Hello, and a very time zone appropriate salutation to you, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans! Ashley, we were trying to tell you something that I wanted to tell you when we weren't recording.
Ooh.
But I have been so busy this week with all the stuff we're covering in this episode, and you, dear listeners, will hear about all of that this week. We've got stuff about GIDS, we've got stuff about Spain, we've got stuff about Scotland, and of course we're going to be covering the tragic, horrifying death of Brianna Ghey. Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a heavy episode, but before that, I have begun playing Dungeons and Dragons. I've done it. I have become more of a trans woman stereotype than I have before.
Woo! Awesome. So what are you playing? What's your character?
My character is Nikki Wildheart. She is a halfling ranger with a partially tragic backstory and partially a really happy one. And she has a whip.
Nice.
And so I was there with the dungeon master person, right, selecting my weapons, and I looked down the list and there was warhammers and rapiers and all sorts of fantasy things, and I saw that there was a whip, and I was like, yes, that's her. She's got a whip.
That's what we're doing.
But then every person I tell about this, and I've been telling a lot of people about this because I'm very excited. I'm quite the nerd, and I love this stuff. And everyone said, is this because you're a bit of a kinkster, Michelle? Is the whip thing you trying to come out something just like, no, I was Indiana Jones, Catwoman.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to go for. Something between Catwoman and Indiana Jones as her character. That's kind of what I wanted to go for. But now everyone thinks I'm a kinkster now because of my D&D character's choices.
You're going for thrilling heroics rather than thrilling bedroom fun times.
Yeah, I don't know how we would roleplay those things. Well, I mean, we've discussed on here before how we've had episodes entirely built around you explaining less conventional sexual fare to me.
Okay, that's true. We did do that. Episode 69.
Yeah, that's entirely what that episode was. So I would be the worst at role-playing, like, oh, my character has a fetish for plants or something.
In the bedroom. Yeah, that's probably not quite the vibe you might be going for, or maybe it is. I don't know. That's obviously for you to decide. No judgment.
I was coming at it from a very PG-rated brain. Just like, oh, she's got a whip, and she's going to whip zombies' heads off, and that's going to be cool. Yeah. And the Dungeon Master was like, is she going to be a bit dominatrixy? And I was like, I don't think halflings can be. Like, I don't want to kink-shame the halfling species, you know. I don't want to. But, you know, in all the representations I saw of them, they're quite innocent folk. Like, they seem like a very missionary sex kind of people.
Yes, I suppose so. But then, you know, hashtag not all tieflings. So.
Yeah, that's true. You shouldn't judge. There'll be vanilla tieflings, and they will be the kinkiest fucking halflings you could imagine.
Oh, yes.
For people that don't know, tieflings are like a demon-y race. Like, they're not evil. They just have horns and look a bit like goats. And halflings like hobbits, you know. Like, my character's kind of like Frodo if he fought Nazis. That's kind of what I'm going for. But anyway, enough about my nerdy obsession of this past couple of weeks. How have you been? What's going on?
Yes, I've been all right. I've started going to physio at a gym in a hospital. So it's like a specific gym for people who are, you know, disabled. And so after we record later this afternoon, I am off to the hospital to go and do that. So I'm actually quite looking forward to that.
How is a hospital gym different from a gym?
Well, it's all the stuff is designed to be used by disabled people, and so rather than, you know, rowing machines and weightlifting and stuff, it's got like several sets of parallel bars, several sets of those quite like firm beds that you can do the stuff that I would normally do on the bed or on the sofa. I can do that on there. Yes, the only problem is this time I've got to take at least one of my crutches with me, so I'm thinking I'll just stick it out on the wheelchair in front of me like a lance, you know, like I'm about to do some jousting, and hope that encourages people to get out of the way. Because to travel to the hospital from here, I've got to go through both university campuses, so there's lots of people not really paying attention to where they're walking. That's not unique to students, but there are a lot of them, so...
That needs to be a Paralympic event. wheelchair jousting.
Wheelchair joust, or wheelchair versus pedestrian jousting, and the pedestrian athlete gets more points if they manage to dive out of the way.
Yeah, that's such an awesome idea. It's like, it's bringing a little element of Gladiators into it, you know, that 90s show.
I remember the one.
I started watching Gladiators recently, that's why I brought it up. For people who were like born post 9/11, it was the goofiest show about like essentially bodybuilders hitting each other as a primetime Saturday night TV. Like, that's what TV was like before it was all reality shows. I guess it kind of was a reality show, but it's like, yeah, it was really bizarre.
And they'd have competitors come on and say, right, if you can stand on this raised pedestal with a gladiator trying to hit you with a giant cotton bud on a stick type thing, and you have to defend yourself and remain on the platform, and all these other games that they'd play. It was all very, very silly looking back on it. But unfortunately, we are not here just to wax lyrical about 90s television. Sadly, because we absolutely could do that for an entire episode, but we've got some other stuff to do, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got some, what's on the sheet? We've got...
what is it again? Oh, not the news.
Oh, it's the news again.
Why do we...
It keeps happening. News keeps happening. It won't stop. I wrote a thing on the website, like, kind of mapping out what the year would be, and I said 2023 is probably going to be hard for trans people. So far, wow.
Yeah.
Fucking wow. Yeah, so to kick things off, this news has got some good stuff, but it's also got some weird stuff. So let's get into that weird. We have major development from GIDS, the GIDS fiasco, that have not exactly gained the attention you would usually expect, probably because there has been a lot going on with Scotland, and now Brianna Ghey. We'll be getting to her later, that she's going to be the meat of our episode. But this is a pretty big one. GIDS staff have put together an open letter that has raised concerns about how NHS England are handling the proposed closure of GIDS, the Trans Youth Clinic, and transferring to a regional centres model. The letter says that 50 of 85 staff members have endorsed the letter, and that it accuses NHS England and the CAS Review of failing to engage with GIDS staff about the closure of their service and the future of trans youth healthcare. In the letter, they claim that the GIDS stakeholder group, made up of 30 young people and parents and carers of trans youth, have not been consulted enough by the CAS Review. The CAS Review is a project put together by the NHS to review how trans healthcare for trans youth should work in the future. In an interim report published last year by the CAS Review, they pointed out that waiting times for GIDS are too long.
Oh, they noticed.
Yeah, they noticed. And the NHS should move away from having just one central clinic covering England and Wales. So, like, there's a Sandyford in Scotland, they cover Scotland, and England and Wales is covered by GIDS currently. As a result of this, the NHS decided to wind down GIDS and established, to start with, 2 interim new clinics, one in Manchester and one in London. A service specification for these new clinics was put out for a public consultation last year. We covered that extensively, and it was widely criticised at the time by trans health researchers and trans people in the community for seemingly outlining how they wouldn't provide puberty blockers to trans youths unless they submitted themselves to a research protocol, with no clear definition as to what that actually means. It also stated that GPs will be instructed to initiate safeguarding protocols if parents of trans youths gain blockers from less conventional sources, which could play out as GPs calling the police on parents seeking healthcare. Like, that's the worst case scenario of that. Yeah. Safeguarding protocols could mean a lot of things, and they didn't really specify what would happen next. The open letter astonishingly claims that this service specification was meddled with by cabinet ministers, as they point out that a very different service specification was published for a few hours in September, but then taken down only for the service specification we covered to come out in October that was very different. The open letter went on to claim that NHS England has wasted a tremendous amount of money on something called the GIDS Transformation Programme, a programme set up to improve the service post the Kira Bell Tavistock case in 2020. They state that the programme has at the least cost NHS England £1.5 million on external consultants alone that were brought in to improve the service. And just as they were to implement the recommendations from this programme, NHS England decided to close it down, wasting a whole bunch of money. They also stated that since the initial decision in the Bell versus Tavistock case in late 2020, the service has seen an increase in deaths related to the clinic. That's the phrase, deaths related to the clinic. They put this down to the increased instability at GIDS over the past 2 years as a result of NHS England's mismanagement. So this letter is comprehensive and we have confirmed its authenticity. It was published on Medium, so it could be argued that it was all nonsense coming from anywhere. But we at What the Trans have had confirmation that this letter indeed is coming from GIDS staff members. At time of recording this, we have not received any statements from GIDS staff. This comes alongside a Vice News article by who else? Ben Hunt, which features NHS sources claiming that the new clinics aimed at replacing GIDS are not ready yet. One source told Ben, "All I can really do now is wrap these trans kids up in cotton wool through these difficult years with no support, and then get them as ready as possible to get into adult gender services when they hit 18. It's hard to not think that this was a deliberate act by NHS England and they're deliberately hurting trans children for a political win." The Vice article claims that GIDS is due to close in weeks because the NHS initially stated that GIDS would close in the spring. However, according to the open letter from GIDS staff have not been given a required 6 months notice for GIDS to be closed. As a result, at the time of recording, GIDS is still expected to be operating until September at the very least. Because turns out you have to give 6 months notice so that the service can have 6 months to transfer over, and also there's a whole employment dispute kind of going on by the sounds of this open letter.
Yes, indeed.
Like, a lot of the staff don't know if they're going to have jobs after this. But what the Trans has learned, that NHS England itself is suffering under the weight of the current NHS crisis, as healthcare in the UK has taken a total nosedive over the past year due to COVID-19 and years of government cuts. This could be one reason why this total shit show has taken place. I should point out, I didn't write this down in the script, I probably should have, but NHS England is currently being combined with a whole other department in the NHS, and staff there are basically facing massive cuts, like huge cuts.
Right.
So NHS England is in the shit. Like, it's probably safe to say that there are transphobes operating in NHS England. There have been stories over the past couple of years of transphobes blocking trans-related things inside the NHS England. Like, gender-critical people are there. But it's also important to take into account how the NHS is in the shit, and NHS England is going through massive structural changes at the moment. So that's probably also a factor too. But I don't know. I can't know. This is entirely speculation. But yeah. So questions over the future of GIDS and trans youth healthcare remain. Not least, will GIDS staff have jobs after this closes? Will they be transferred to new clinics or just made redundant? Will there be a totally new staff? Who's going to train them? Where are they coming from? Will they know anything? When are the current patients going to be transferred? What about new patients? How much has all this strife and NHS England's alleged mismanagement cost both financially and in trans kids' lives by the sounds of things? For now, we don't know. Ashley, I just dumped a whole load of shit on you.
You sure did.
What are your thoughts with that?
Well, is my thoughts on that. There's quite a lot of them and they're all coming out at once, so it's mostly just bleh. But it's not surprising to see decisions like this being made. I think it's quite, as the open letter points out, there seems to be some politicking going on. NHS England making decisions on a political basis rather than what's good on a medical basis, which a few years ago might have surprised me. It doesn't now, I think. You're quite right about, the patients that are currently on the waiting list. Are these clinics actually going to be set up, or are they just going to string them along for several months and then say, no, we're not going to do that, and just leave trans youngsters twisting in the wind? The same situation that they would have been in before GIDS was set up, before the trans youth healthcare pathway even existed, which means that they will have to wait until they turn 18, so puberty blockers might not be available. They'd have to get them through GPs, so they'd have to have a GP who's sympathetic or at least prepared to listen. And with the blockers thing, that is seen as like a specialist thing that GPs don't tend to want to prescribe on their own. And I'm not sure if they can't. I think that they probably could, but they just would be terrified of the consequences, because GPs, when they prescribe it, like, they're most of the time prescribing it to like people with certain cancers. Like, that's one of the uses these can be used for. So it's seen as like a special thing. But for me, it's very, very hard to say this is the NHS's fault, because over a decade now of Tory austerity and making those cuts to the NHS, cutting it to the bone, I'm amazed there's anything left to shave off at this point. So it's difficult to say this is the NHS's fault. They've made a decision which has specifically harmed trans kids. Up until this point, they've seemingly done what they could, which unfortunately hasn't been very much because of the backlog, because of the cuts, because of everything. And now the higher-ups at NHS England, who may well be Tory appointees or have been manoeuvred into position because of ideological loyalty rather than because of any skill, that situation seems quite realistic now. Whereas, I say, a few years ago, that would have been, no, don't be silly, that's the sort of thing that happens in a really corrupt place like Russia or, well, like the UK now, really. So I hope things will improve, but I can't pretend I'm super optimistic, and obviously we'll keep an eye on this, and we will signpost to alternative care pathways as they become available, but it's not looking good. To me, it just looks like they're going to make the service useless and then blame the service for it and just completely close all of it down. That's my thinking of where certain people would like it to be taken, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I've been reticent to try and assign intent. I've been trying to focus more on what is, purely because I have no idea what certain people in certain places are thinking, and there's no way that I can know.
Yeah.
What I do know is that there is a hell of a lot of uncertainty amongst GIDS staff, amongst service users, and that uncertainty is doing real harm right now. There are people on a waiting list who don't know when they're going to be seen or where or by who. There's GIDS staff who are living under the constant threat of at any point being like, right, you don't have a job anymore. And the letter made reference to people leaving, which is having an impact on patient care because they're having trouble keeping staff. Because would you stick around if they're like, right, at some point we could either tell you you've got a new job somewhere else or cut you? Like, wouldn't you start looking for a new job in that circumstance? So yeah, like, that's the reality of it now. And they've made reference to deaths related to GIDS. I know that people hearing that will jump to a conclusion of deaths by suicide and stuff like that, because that has been a very prominent thing in the media over the last year. As prominent as, fair, objective trans stories can be in our media. But that's all we know. Deaths related to GIDS. That could mean a lot of things, and I think the GIDS staff had to be very, very careful about how they phrased that for various legal and ethical reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, this open letter did not get the kind of traction I would have expected it to, probably because of all the other news that's been going on, because there's been a lot. Yes. 2023 has already been very, very busy. Yes. When it comes to news.
And particularly this week.
Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on it and making inquiries and stuff, so, stick with us, and if we find any stuff out there, we'll let you know as soon as we know. Well, what's the next thing?
Well, on the subject of open letters, we're going to be talking about a particular media outlet, a particular left-leaning media outlet with a prestigious history, which has been publishing increasingly anti-trans articles of late. They've platformed those who claim that being trans is wrong, and used that to justify limiting access to healthcare to young people. They've also recently published defences of J.K. Rowling, claiming that she is not transphobic, and so many more things. But this outlet, which, as I say, was once widely respected, no, I am not talking about The Guardian. I am, of course, referring to The New York Times. The paper used to be a lot better on trans issues, publishing the occasional opinion piece arguing that transphobia in the UK was bizarre and strange. But now, since the United States has started up their own moral panic, the New York Times has done a Guardian and begun publishing stories featuring sources that anyone with, a functioning brain would argue is objectionable. So it's reached the point now where over 1,000 contributors to the New York Times have signed an open letter to the outlet's associate managing editor for standards, expressing serious concerns about editorial bias in the paper's trans issues reporting. Now, the letter, linked on this episode's webpage and down in the description, claimed that the NYT has published over 15,000 words on their front pages debating whether trans youth should get healthcare or not. It specifically noted articles that have appeared over the last year, including Emily Bazelon's The Battle Over Gender Therapy, which they argue vilifies transness, and that sources who contributed to the article feel that they are being misrepresented. It also pointed at a history of NYT articles taking quotes from radical anti-trans sources, including the president of GCCAN, an activist organisation they claim partners with explicitly anti-trans hate groups. So alongside the 1,000 10,000 plus NYT contributors who have signed the letter, an astounding 20,000 media workers, subscribers and readers of the NYT have also signed the letter. Now, so far, the only response from the publication has been that they have received the open letter from GLAAD, the US-based LGBT advocacy organisation, and that as a news organisation, they are proud of the reporting they have done on trans issues. The problem with that response from the NYT is that this open letter did not come from GLAAD. GLAAD had nothing to do with putting it together, so either the NYT are attempting to avoid addressing the points in the letter, or they honestly thought that the GLAAD letter was the same as the open letter put together by the NYT contributors, which, for a newspaper that is proud of its reporting, doing some basic fact-checking on a letter they've received would kind of seem to be the sensible thing to do, but no, apparently not. What a joke.
Yeah, so GLAAD put together their own thing to the New York Times, and seemingly the NYT has decided that that GLAAD letter is the same as this NYT open letter from contributors and those related to the publication, which is astonishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, America's going through its own thing. They've taken up, like, it's like they've learned the tricks of the moral panic from the UK and then ramped it down up to 11. Like, you've got multiple states actively banning trans healthcare for youths, or attempting to, at an astonishing pace.
Yeah. Well, some states have even criminalised it, haven't they?
Yeah, like, some are just like, you go to prison for 10 years.
For helping trans youth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're going through the same steps with more guns, which is terrifying. Like, armed people are showing up at drag story times, which is not exactly a trans thing, but they've kind of become related, like, on the right and the far right in the States, whereas, like, it's grooming children to become gender variant and get their bits cut off. Like, that's the line. And the New York Times are making all the same mistakes that The Guardian did. They are absolutely doing the same thing. And I think this shows a weakness with a certain kind of centre-left outlet.
Yeah.
Because they can and often do take people, assume that everyone's operating in good faith, but that isn't true.
Yes.
And I believe that part of a journalist's job is to try and work out if you are getting the best sources to talk about things. Like, if you don't just go to anyone who's saying anything and not, look at what they're about and what their biases might be. Like, that's what you do.
It's like page one stuff, surely.
Yeah.
As a journalist, if somebody says, oh, it's raining, your job isn't to report that someone said it's raining. Your job is to look out of the fucking window and check if it's raining, rather than just publishing comment from these questionable sources in, an attempt to that whole, free and open marketplace of ideas bullshit that the BBC have tried so many times.
I don't know what's going on with, like, New York-based, like, centre-left journalists, but there was another thing I saw from a writer in New York Magazine.
Okay.
And it was about essentially defending the New York Times on their coverage of, like, trans youth healthcare. And I read it. And there was a lot that I didn't know because I'm in the UK. I've been covering the shit show here. Like, America is something I try to keep an eye on, but it's not something I've gone into any depth with. But what I have gone into depth with is GIDS.
Yes.
And in the intro to this article, this guy wrote that GIDS is being closed down because of the clinical practices at GIDS, which isn't true. Like, that's not a reason that's been stated by NHS England why they're winding it down. The reasons have been explicit in the cast review that it's about waiting times. That's what they're claiming. Whereas GIDS staff are claiming that is just being used as an excuse to get rid of them, according to the open letter that we just talked about. Yeah. But this article has the line, the Tavistock is being shut down. And what struck me about that is that GIDS isn't called the Tavistock. The Tavistock is the building that GIDS is in. This guy didn't even Google the fucking name. Yeah. He clearly just, like, read a bunch of anti-trans crap in the UK media and just transferred that over, assuming it was right. And it's like, one fucking Google, you would have got the name right. One Google, you would have realised that they've released service specification for new clinics, and that on paper, it's arguable that the NHS is expanding trans youth healthcare, not shutting it down, whereas he wrote it like, oh, look, England is not doing this thing anymore because it's bad. Maybe we should look at it. Maybe the New York Times is right to look at this. And it's like, that's not the situation at all.
Yeah, that's not what's going on here.
No, there's 2 new clinics being set up badly with massive fucking alarm bells over them massive criticisms have been coming out, but looking at it, the situation is more complex. But he wrote about the GIDS situation in a way to justify the New York Times reporting that was everything he wrote about GIDS was wrong. Every single thing, especially getting the fucking name wrong. Yeah. And then he goes on about how, like, oh, journalistic integrity must ask difficult questions. It's like, you're not even doing your basic fucking research.
Yeah. Yeah, journalistic integrity goes both ways, Chuck.
Yeah, and so the New York Times angle on this is they think that they're, crusading, asking difficult questions of things and stuff, and they're not. They're joining in. They're joining in with the moral panic. That's objectively what they're doing.
Yeah.
The thing to take from this is that over 1,000 New York Times contributors have come out against us in a big way. 20,000 other people, subscribers and media workers, have also joined in. That is not something we've ever seen when it comes to comparable situations in the UK regarding The Guardian.
Mm.
There was a rebellion inside The Guardian, but that was hundreds. And to call it a rebellion is a bit of a stretch. It was basically a letter they sent around to each other.
Mm.
This was like a stadium amount of people have come together saying, hey, cut this shit out. You're sanitizing far-right talking points. And the New York Times arrogantly have come out saying, oh, we're doing the great work. Woodward, Bernstein, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that's something to take away from this, that people are really fighting this in the States, because the States have got a more linked up, equality network than the UK has. Ours is sporadic, spaced out, and not got many numbers. America, they've got numbers, they got money, they got some power. So there's a real chance that they can fight this and win.
I hope so. I really do.
Yeah. But yeah, fuck New York Magazine, and fuck the New York Times right now. We'll keep an eye on that. So we have an update on Scotland.
Indeed.
The Scottish Government's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has stepped down from the role after 8 years. She's been a massive supporter of trans people over that time, not without issues relating to perceived failures in tackling transphobia in her own party, but she was a major driving force behind the recently blocked gender recognition reform bill, and she never appeared to back down from fighting for it. Not really. This came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people didn't really see this coming. But in her speech, where she announced she would be stepping down, she said that the biggest reason for her decision was how she felt she could no longer give 100% to the job. She referenced the mental and physical toll the job took on her. And she said, so what I'm really saying is this. If the only question was, can I battle on for another few months? Then the answer is yes, of course I can. But if the question is, can I give this job everything it demands and deserves for another year, let alone for the remainder of this parliamentary term, give it every ounce of energy that it needs in the way that I have strived to do every day for the past 8 years, the answer honestly is different. And as that is my conclusion, hard though it has been for me to reach it, then given the nature and scale of the challenges the country faces, I have a duty to say so now. I feel that duty first and foremost to our country to ensure that it has the energy of leadership it needs, not just today, but through the years that remain of this parliamentary term. And right now, in a very particular sense, I feel that duty to my party too. So when she was later asked by a journalist about if the response to the gender recognition bill and the brouhaha around trans prisoners was a factor, she stated bluntly that short-term pressures such as those were not a factor. She used the term short-term pressures.
I see.
Naturally, as she announced this, many trans people online predicted, including myself, that despite what she claimed, the transphobic press would probably argue that trans issues harmed her ability to stay in the position, and maybe even harmed the cause of Scottish independence. And lo and behold, they were right. The Telegraph alone published 4 articles claiming that trans issues are what brought her down. American transphobic outlets, the New York Times and The Atlantic, also jumped on this, and on top of them, movie villain fascist Donald Trump took a pop at her too. But where does this leave gender recognition for Scottish trans people? We don't know. One of the Telegraph's articles about her resignation included claims from an anonymous SNP source saying, we need to get back on track by pursuing things that matter to the people of Scotland, not pushing stuff that the public is vehemently opposed to. I take issue with that being true. But, they went on to say, I expect the gender reforms to be parked somewhere as quickly as possible. Any sensible new leader will want to get that off the front pages and quickly. The Scottish Government has until April to challenge Westminster's blocking of the GRR bill. So time will tell if this is true, what that source said. A leadership contest is about to begin, And you can be sure that issues around this bill will be coming up during that.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this? Like, this seemed to come out of nowhere for a lot of people.
Yeah, I was certainly surprised by it as well. But, as you say, she's been in the job for 8 years, and that's quite a long time in politics. And she's had to fight for everything from Westminster, every bloody step of the way. And I think the fact that she's made the announcement now was probably planned weeks, if not months ago. Unfortunately, it's also been somewhat overtaken by events, I think. I think if the government hadn't blocked the GRR bill, there would be a slightly, but not massively different narrative playing out just now. But, I mean, again, this is completely me speculating. Do not take this as, the high-minded, well-researched words of a seasoned political editor. This is me in my bedroom. So, yeah, it came as a surprise to me, and I hope the SNP continues the good work that they've been doing with her at the lead, but I hope that anonymous SNP source in The Telegraph is wrong, and I hope the next leader does go out to bat for trans people with the same strength that Nicola Sturgeon always showed.
Yeah, there's a number of names coming up as potentials. John Swinney, Deputy First Minister. I don't know what any of these people I'm going to list off here, their opinions are on the GRR bill. I'm assuming vague support if they're on the front bench and haven't resigned over the issue. I'm assuming vague support if they voted for the GRR bill.
Yes.
But then that's no guarantee because, as we have seen, supposed allies in politics can and have dropped trans people when it's become too hard and as maybe risks costing other things they want to do. But yeah, like Kate Forbes is another name that comes up. She's one to maybe worry about. She's currently the Scottish Finance Secretary, and she is quite religious in the more bigoted religion wing. Like, not all Christians are like this, obviously, but she's part of that kind of crowd that is against abortion and kind of against LGBT rights. So, but because Scotland is kind of, compared to Westminster by any means, a bit more rational.
Yes.
Some Scottish people may take issue with that, but compared to Westminster, I want to make that clear, compared to Westminster, that might actually be a hindrance to her, which is refreshing to hear these days. There's Humza Yousaf, he's in the running. There's a bunch of people that could take this on, and I don't know where this could go. It could be that, it could be that, like, the next leader decides this is going to cost too much for the main reason why we're here, Scottish independence. So, should probably drop this. It's sad to do it, but we maybe should. Or it might be, well, fuck trans people, this bill is rubbish and shit. Like, it could be either of those, I don't know. But it's very much up in the air.
I mean, equally, it could be that they say, no, this is important, it stays.
Yeah, that is a thing too.
It's possible. No idea how likely it is, but that is possible. And honestly, that's the outcome I'm hoping for. But we shall see what occurs.
Yeah, like with everything else, we'll be watching this and let you know as soon as we know other things. But yeah, so after all that, you've got some good. Right?
Yes, I do. News. I do actually have some slightly positive news. It's not about the UK, though. So our little palate cleanser this time is that the Spanish Parliament has passed a new LGBT plus bill that will ban conversion therapy, provide state support for single women and lesbian couples to pursue IVF, and allow trans people to change their legal gender far more easily. The bill changes the rules around changing legal gender by ditching the previous requirement of proof of being on hormones for 2 years and gaining a medical diagnosis. It also lowers the age a person can change their legal gender to 16, while also allowing those aged 14 to change their legal gender with parental consent, and for those as young as 12 to change their legal gender with permission from a judge, which is quite an interesting way to go about it. Quite good. I mean, the judge being involved is, too rich for my blood, as we might say, but it is nevertheless, this is a huge step forward. And the bill also became the very first of its kind in Europe, as it allowed provision for people to take paid menstrual leave from work if they suffer debilitating periods. This bill is an absolute fucking beast. It really is. So, it did cause some controversy due to the trans parts. Spain has also been going through something of a moral panic over trans issues, but their left-wing government pushed this through anyway. And really, it shames the UK in how they managed to do both gender recognition reform and ban conversion therapy and still have the time to help people seek IVF. Whoop whoop. If you've watched Community, magnitude, pop pop.
Pop pop indeed. I mean, this is obviously not made with the intention of showing the UK up. Like, obviously this was about...
Isn't it? Oh.
It's clearly about helping, like, the Spanish LGBT community and, you know, cis women a lot, like, in a big way too. And, you know, trans men and all of that. Like, they really thought about those folks born with the downstairs parts of a certain type that I thought was quite refreshing. And they packed in all this stuff that the UK just can't seem to do into one bill. And I'm just like, that is sort of dropping a gauntlet, but not really. They know that wasn't really the intention, but that's kind of a way you could take it, and I find that kind of amusing. But yeah, I mean, there's still progress being made all across the world. It's out there. You have to look for it because it's buried a lot of the time, but it's there. And this is unambiguously a good thing. Like, the first in the world to offer menstrual leave, like, period pains and period issues are like such a huge thing that people are just expected to live with, just deal with, and not even necessarily talk about. So this is a huge step. And yeah, God bless the Spanish government for pushing it through, even though they've got their own issues with GC people, they've got their own issues with anti-trans people, they got their own issues with, you know, right-wing people being all like, fuck everyone who isn't exactly like me.
Yes.
But yeah, this is just good. It's just good.
Yeah.
Well done, Spain. I wish I knew some Spanish so I could say, well done, Spain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations to Spaniel. No, I'm gonna end up doing a hate crime if I even attempt this with my limited knowledge.
Honestly, we should have looked up something to say in Spanish beforehand, shouldn't we? Never mind. But honestly, that's great news. It's nice to know that progress is still possible in places that are not rainy fascism island. Unlike Spain, of course, which has never had any problems with right-wing governments before. History joke.
Spanish Civil War, baby.
Oh, yeah. Well, not yeah. It wasn't really a very... Well, let's not start talking about the Spanish Civil War, because we have something a little closer to home to talk about, don't we? So, as you might guess, as you might have guessed when it happened, and indeed we've already said at the top of the episode, that the main chunk of what we're going to be talking about for the meat this week is going to be Brianna Ghey. Brianna Ghey is a 16-year-old trans girl who was out and who was stabbed to death in a park in Warrington over the weekend. Warrington is not very far from Manchester. I actually used to drive to Warrington from where I lived in Wigan to go to work. So I know Warrington reasonably well. So this has sent shockwaves around the LGBTQ community in the UK, and a series of vigils have been and are taking place all over the country as a mark of respect and mourning for the murdered teenager. We ourselves have attended some of these vigils, myself in Manchester, Michelle in London, and we'll get on to talking about those in a minute. But for the facts, 2 15-year-olds are currently, that is at time of recording, being charged with Brianna's murder, but it is still only being investigated as a possible hate crime. It wasn't initially at all, but Cheshire Police did run into some criticism on social media from users who found the idea that her being trans wasn't a factor a little bit hard to swallow. Now, initial news reports didn't actually mention the fact she was trans, likely because the people writing those reports didn't know about it themselves. Almost as soon as that became known, though, the news organisations over here backtracked. Quite a few of them stopped reporting Ghey's death in the respectful tone they'd used initially and fell back on what we've come to expect from them. One paper, The Times, initially used the word girl to refer to her, but once the news broke that she was trans, they removed it. They then took the time to find out her dead name so they could use it in their shitty rag. Now, there are a number of other examples of outlets retroactively changing coverage to be nastier towards trans people, but primarily for my own mental health, I'm not going to talk much about them here, because I can't. I just can't. This is a 16-year-old girl was murdered, and now people are lying about her to score political points. And I can't. I'm not reading that out. I'm not doing it. Now, what we've seen this week from certain and unsurprising corners of the press has been horrendous, really. But the slightly more honest stuff was loud and clear too. Brianna was someone catastrophically let down by those you would expect to keep her safe. After her death, friends of hers told reporters that she'd been bullied in school for years, with both the school and local authorities failing to take any action. One of her friends said she was bullied and gang beaten for years for the simple fact of being trans. Her high school and Cheshire police refused to intervene, and it's also now emerged that Brianna's father had raised concerns about her bullying to the school that she attended several times with nothing being done. Even Damien Harry, a father of one of Brianna's friends, was aware of the level of bullying that she endured. He told Mail Online that she said she was devastated by the constant abuse and even talked of ending it all. And he went on to say that it was down to her being trans. It is disgusting what happened. Her dad has apparently said he raised safeguarding at the school 1,000 times, but little was done. So far, the school have declined to comment on any of these claims. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a rough week, hasn't it, Michelle?
Yeah. Some housekeeping. I don't want to relate certain things as reasons, as potential motivations. There's an ongoing case.
Yeah, we can't do that.
We don't want to fuck with that, not only because of the case, but also legally. We don't really want to get into any trouble. It's just a very dicey area to jump to conclusions to. Having said that, it's very hard to divorce from the case the context that this horrific tragedy happened in. We're in a country that has been in a moral panic about trans issues for years. Anything remotely trans has been vilified by the press for years. Government ministers and politicians in general have jumped into that also. The framing of trans issues and trans people has been any kind of disgusting. That's not going to be news for anyone. So it's going to be very hard to divorce that context from the situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the direction that a lot of the vigils around the country, because there's been over 50 of them, either planned or already happened, depending on when you listen to this.
Yeah.
We'll include on the link sheet that you can find in the description a list that Stonewall is a Riot have put together. Very cool crew. They monitor like where protests are happening and have kind of become a central point for like where you should go if you want to find where a protest or a vigil or any kind of trans event is happening. They're very good. And from the London one, which I was going to go there just as a person. I may have done a few tweets, maybe a few Mastodon things or something, but I wasn't really going to do a thing on it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think I could at the beginning of the week. Trans youth stuff gets to me, and with the GIDS stuff as well. There was a lot of trans youth stuff, so my brain was overloaded for a good couple of days. But then, somebody from Open Democracy reached out, asked if I wanted to cover it, and at first I was like, I don't know. But then I thought, all right, I'll do it. It'll be a way to get trans voices out there.
Yeah.
You know, and that's probably what is needed, so I'll go and do it.
It was a good article. Well done.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, I'll link to that too if you want to read it. But yeah, I'll talk about what I saw there. It was a vigil and a protest. It was angry at points. It was sad at points. People expressed rage at the climate and the institutions in the country that have been incredibly trans hostile. They also expressed rage and grief at how this young kid isn't here anymore. But there was also a lot of catharsis with it. Like, I spoke to a number of people there, and a lot of people told me that like they felt better seeing the community come together, and they felt better being around people to express how they feel about it.
Yeah.
And that made me feel better. And me doing the Open Democracy thing definitely made me feel a lot better, because it felt like I could do something. Because another thing that people told me was that they felt powerless.
Yeah.
They felt that they couldn't protect trans youth lives. And so that helped me. But I mean, it's bigger than me. There was just a lot going on at this thing in London. It was outside the Department of Education. The organisers, Transgender Action Bloc, they made it explicitly clear that was a deliberate decision, because they wanted to focus on the government level transphobia. They wanted to make that point. And yeah, there was a moment where people lit candles and held up their phone flashlights and stuff. There was a die-in for a short period where everyone lied down to simulate trans lives that may have been lost over the years. And yeah, it was really fucking something. For more concise coverage of what I saw, go read that Open Democracy thing. But yeah, how is the one in Manchester? How have you been doing with all this?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's a bit difficult to divorce the fact that a trans kid, a child, has been murdered from the way that trans people are talked about and vilified and campaigned against in the media. And we've been, you and I have been saying for months, if not years, between ourselves and in the friend groups I've got here in Manchester, that at some point this culture war is going to have someone's gonna get killed over this stuff. And now somebody has, and it was a child. At the very beginning of her life, someone described by her family in, these amazing terms that showed they accepted her fully. They described her as a beloved daughter and sister, Yeah, so I wasn't coping very well. So the Manchester Vigil was organised by MTRU, Manchester Trans Rise Up, which I'm in, part of it. I would describe it as a group chat that got wildly out of hand.
As all the best things are.
So we've all been connected and vaguely talking to each other for months, but just earlier this week, within the space of a few hours, it's like, right, we're holding a vigil. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to need a PA system. So let's see if I can call in a favour. So I did that. So yeah, called an old friend basically to sort out a PA system. And it was held in Sackville Gardens. And you've been to Sackville Gardens with me, Michelle. And it's not a massive park. It's just a little square of greenery. There's a statue that's the beacon of hope, the AIDS memorial. Next to that there's the National Trans Memorial, which was unfortunately, as I think I mentioned at the time, set on fire at Pride last year. We don't know if that was accidental or not, but again, the cultural context of that occurrence makes it difficult to assume somebody did it by mistake. So yeah, we were gathered around the top end, and we had assumed that it would be 80 to 150 people, 200 if we were lucky. But then as we arrived rolling in from where I lived down Canal Street, we just saw all of these people, so many people queuing all the way down Sackville Street, and just to get into the park. There's two entrances to the park, but there's only one I can use because it's wheelchair accessible. So we went there and were sort of waved in and waved through to the front of the area where, because that's where the wheelchair viewing point is, essentially at the front, because you can't really put the wheelchair users at the back because they're not going to be able to see and hear anything. So we were right down the front, but also because I'd kind of organised it and I'd said, well, I'll speak, again assuming that there would be a couple of hundred at most, and there was, so the count that we got at the end of the night was a little over 2,000 people. And as I was approaching and getting waved through by the security who'd been set up, which had again been just kind of organised on the fly by ourselves at MTRU, calling in favours from the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and a couple of the Sparkle people and the Village Angels, who are the LGBT Foundation people that go around on nights out and make sure everybody's safe and that they're okay. We also had presence from the Proud Trust, from the foundation itself, just so many people that I knew were going to be there. But there was obviously so many ordinary people as well, straight and cis people. And so as all these people were parting like the Red Sea to let me through to the front, I got really upset because holy crap, there's all of these people. I don't deserve for these people to all get out of the way and let me get to the front, etc. And I'd spent a lot of the preceding couple of days doing press, basically. So I was talking about the crime and about the vigil on BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Breakfast, the TV show. And I ended up on BBC Foyle in Northern Ireland as well, again talking about the vigil. So just very very busy couple of days. And by the time I got to the last person I was speaking to, which was Breakfast, I just let them have it, to be honest. And they asked me a question, and every time I managed to pivot it round to, yes, but the press has been hounding trans people for years, and I hope that you and your colleagues reflect upon every inch of what that means.
Nice.
Thank you. Felt good about that one. I don't know if they actually used it because I don't have a TV licence, so I couldn't watch it. Well.
Neither do I. I have no idea. I can't track anything you've done in the media lately apart from the radio stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So that was... But yeah, then to get there, and myself and the 3 or 4 other people who'd been the busiest and chatting and coordinating, we're just all just staring at each other like, holy crap, so many people this is amazing. So we ended up staying for the whole thing. There were actually a couple of Brianna's friends who came up to join us, and they spoke about her and about the gap that's left in their lives as a result, and the kind of person that she was and how she inspired them. I ended up, because I'd agreed to speak and I was going second, but then the person who was going first wasn't there on time, so I ended up going first. And I had like a whole chunk of stuff that I largely forgot to do, but it was covered by other people later, because I was just so overwhelmed by the number of people there. And there was one of the other organisers sat next to me on the slightly raised bit, and I didn't even realise I was doing it, but I noticed that halfway through what I was saying, I was holding her hand. We were just, there with each other in that moment, slightly separate, as I spoke to all of these people. And yeah, one of the things that I said, which I was gratified to get a tremendous cheer for, which is that yes, today we mourn, but tomorrow we fight back. And I think that stands as an observation, is that yes, we have to mourn, but we can't let this carry on. And I made a point of saying there aren't really all that many trans people. We need cis people to stand up and defend us and protest these terrible things that are said about us and that the government try and do to us. We need you. Stay involved. Don't just come out for when something horrible and tragic happens, although obviously thank you for doing that, but it can't just be then. You can't just honour trans people when we're dead.
Yeah, there were similar sentiments from the London one. There was a number of speakers who stepped forward and were basically like, don't just sit online, get on the streets, do something. But yeah, you mentioned Brianna's friends, and that feels like a good way to segue into reading some quotes from an article by who else? Ben Hunt.
Yeah.
His name is probably the most prominent one on What the Trans stuff as a cis guy, because he's on the trans news beat for Vice and seems to be getting a lot of good stuff. He spoke to a number of her friends, and one of her friends told him, she made me feel unstoppable as a trans girl and really pretty because she would never let me put myself down. I met Brianna 3 years ago. We met through TikTok when she was new to the app, when she'd just started doing makeup videos. She was posting about the fact that she was trans, and I told her straight away that I am too, because at that moment I didn't have any trans friends. We were just really similar, and we told each other everything. We even started hormones together. We were supposed to be meeting up later this year, and we've been planning for months how we wanted to have a life together. We would plan our future apartment and how we'd go and get our hair done, have our surgeries, but now I'm having to think about doing all of that by myself. I'll link to this article again. It's just full of people talking about Brianna, which is something that can get lost in these kind of things. There is a person, a young girl who had a life, and by all accounts, she was delightful. One quote from the piece says, I'm just so angry and sad. The sweetest 60-year-old girl who was a beacon of positivity, now gone. Brianna Ghey's family has come out saying that she was a beloved daughter. There's been reports of her, trying to assist people. Yeah.
Yeah. Give me a minute.
Sorry, Ash. I didn't notice until just 30 seconds ago.
It's alright. It kind of only started about 30 seconds ago. So. Just...
We can cool it on that stuff there. That's enough.
Yeah, this bit can probably stay in, I suppose, but what really gets to me about all this is I can hack to an extent, I can hack the press transphobia, and I can hack the culture of hostility, because I'm like the frog in the pan of slowly heating up water. But it's when you're hearing about what a delightful person we seem to have lost, and about her and the bright, bubbly, helpful, delightful person she was. Just, hurts a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm angry. This has been a tremendously difficult period, and that may seem strange to some because I didn't know Brianna, never met her, but her story is, I think it's a very human thing to feel this, because stuff about trans youths always gets to me, and it gets to a lot of people, because when it comes to adults and older people, we kind of have something in us, even if we're not parents, we kind of want to protect kids.
Yeah.
So the idea of something happening to a young person, like a child, an adolescent, teenager, even young adult,
Yeah.
it's horrifying. It gets to you. And there are people out there who are going to be arguing that, like, people are weaponizing this.
The people who complain about, oh, the trans community are weaponizing that, it's like, are politicizing that, sorry. It's like, well, you have been politicizing everything else about our existence for years. So, you know, if somebody needs to stop politicizing it, you should look in a mirror.
Yeah, this is what Roz said to me. She was the lady I interviewed in the last episode, for people who don't know. Roz said, people will accuse us of weaponizing it. We're not weaponizing it. We're just really angry and really upset. And if they, the people who are accusing the trans community of weaponizing this, feel called to account by that, tough, because they deserve to be called to account. It is a disgrace. This country is looking bad in front of the world, and I, for one, am sick of it. And not to just start reading the article I put together, like, based on what was communicated to me during that vigil, she is far from alone.
Yeah. I think it's probably quite a good place to start to wrap it up, really, isn't it? Because we could go on. We honestly could go on about the context and the culture that has created this horrific thing. A family have lost their child in this country that spends so much of its time arguing that trans people are evil. And this is what happens. And we could spend hours talking about the minutiae of that, but I'm not sure that's such a good idea, both for, listenability and for mental health.
So there's debate about how useful this is, but I'm going to do it anyway. If you've been affected by all of this stuff that's been going on, got some numbers for you to contact. Obviously, there's the Samaritans. If things get really dark, 24 hours a day, free number, 116123. If you're in some kind of mental health crisis, attend accident and emergency, don't just sit with it, go get some help. For more trans-specific support, there's Mindline Trans Plus. They operate Mondays and Fridays, 8 p.m. till midnight. Their number is 0300 330 5468. There's the LGBT Switchboard, which is open 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. You can call them on 0300 330 0630. And there's also Truck Listens, that's Trans Radio UK support line. They are open 8 a.m. till 2 a.m. every day. Their number is 0800 009 6640. But yeah, reach out to people if you need support. This has been heavy. You can probably tell that by listening. We got a bit upset here. But yeah, do reach out and look after yourselves out there. We will be, this weekend, I will be rolling dice as Nicky Wildheart. And I will be going to see the new Ant-Man film. I think it's important that whilst you do whatever work you do for the community, it's also important to take time off. And my Saturday is going to be a day of fun. And I thoroughly recommend people listening do the same. Ashley, do you have anything fun lined up?
I can't remember what it is. I actually think, because the three of us here, we've all been very involved in our respective workplace discussions about LGBT issues this particular week. And so I'm going to play some games. I think might make some cake, maybe. Just going to do some lovely cottagecore stuff, probably while wearing my new cardigan. So...
I love it.
Yep. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, it's got stars and patches and planets and things all over it. It's cool.
It's a shame this is not a video because it is a beautiful cardigan. But yeah, go out, take an afternoon off from this stuff. Nothing is lost by taking an afternoon, trust me, and everything can be gained. If I didn't have my sort of end goal of rolling some dice with a bunch of queers in North London, I don't know how I would have been able to handle this week. So it's very important that people do that. But I think that's the episode. Thanks for listening.
Yes, indeed. If
you liked what you heard, you can find us on a whole bunch of things online.
Yeah.
We have our website, whatthetrans.com. We're about to start a new series where a trans masculine person on the team, Alex, is going to start talking from his perspective about things, which is something that What the Trans has sorely needed for years. Something that isn't just, trans women moaning. We've also got us on Twitter, What the Trans, Facebook, What the Trans, Mastodon, What the Trans, Instagram, What the Trans, and we have a Patreon. You want to give us money? Cool. If you don't, fine. Patreon.com/What the Trans. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you so much, and look after yourselves and take care of each other. Goodbye.
See you next time. Bye.
episode of What the Trend was written and produced by Ashley Talbot and Michelle Snow, and edited by Ben Swithin. Love you, Ben. And we would especially like to thank our producer-level Patreon supporters, who are Anubis a Jackal,
Camina,
Brandon Craig,
Jenny,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Sophia the Sixth,
Lentil,
Philippa Taprug,
Ramona Martinez,
Alethea Aurora,
Sadie Chegel,
Clara Vulliami,
Amelia,
Kira the asexual turf buster and her trusty sidekick Jiggly Jubs,
Candy Cox,
Zeph,
Fiona McDonald,
Torikuso Hitch,
Murgatroyd,
Claire Renshaw,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Syndergosa,
Rebecca Prentice,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Georgina Young,
Ty Griffiths,
Florence Stanley,
Riley,
Helen,
Chrissy Jarvis,
a dyslexic velociraptor guardian of the inside milk,
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Lynn McKay,
Nick Duffy,
C.B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Peter Kimball,
Wen Riverup,
Vic Parsons,
Tila Wild,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Sarah Bedfull of Dogs,
Emma Doyle,
Catherine,
Elliot McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Ian Coomber,
Karakan 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Niles,
Bernard Pink Jellybean,
Lenos.
and Chris Hubley. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Take
much.
care. Bye.
Bye.